Okay. Clock is now 13 and it's time to open this webinar, which is called Forestry and Forest Biodiversity. And today is the third lessons, and we are now using English. And today we have in program Panu Halme, who is talking about the main threats to biodiversity in boreal Fennoscandia. And after that, Denis Dobrynin is commenting this. And after all, there will be also open questions to lecturer, and then after that, at 14 o'clock, Denis is keeping his lecture, Sustainable Forest Management Discourses in the Era of Bioeconomy, the Case of Russia, and commenting by Panu Halme. And we also have, after that, a comment from Nikolai Larionov, who is head of Arkhangelsk office of World Wildlife Fund's Russia. And he is telling us about the best practices of the forestry management. Okay, is Panu Halme ready? Please.
Okay, do you see my screen at the moment?
Okay, we have to wait 5 seconds when your speech is loud enough. Please talk.
Yeah, is it? Do you hear me now?
Not yet.
What about now?
It's no more better.
Okay. And is it loud enough now?
Can the host of technical host do something about this?
Maybe if you kokeilee sieltä sen audio settings, katsoa, että laittaa kovemmalle sitä ääntä. Ootko sitä säätänyt?
Joo.
Nyt kuuluu.
Okay. Okay, so I think now it should be okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay. Yeah, there's a problem with the Zoom software, so that it's often a bit, the voice is a bit weak when I start, but now it should be okay. Okay, it's nice to be here today. This is my title. I will explain why my talk is a bit different than the title, but it's something like the title anyway. I always like to introduce myself in relation to the topic, so that the audience knows that what is my background and what is actually my knowledge level in relation to the topic. So first, like a short introduction of myself. So yeah, I'm a university lecturer in conservation biology and sustainable use of natural resources in the University of Jyväskylä. And my main research topics are basically, first of all, I'm doing research to document the biodiversity crisis, to study that how different human actions are actually affecting the biodiversity. I've done this kind of research mostly in Finland in relation to Finnish forests and other ecosystems like traditional rural habitats, peatlands, also in some water ecosystems like streams and stuff. And I've also done this similar kind of research in European forests, for example, based on some data from the continental Europe and so on. And some of my research is also related to the mitigation methods so I study how we could actually stop the biodiversity loss, what kind of actions we could do, for example, ecological restoration actions, or how conservation tools like ecological compensation could be used to mitigate the problems. So this kind of research I usually do, and then of course I teach courses on similar topics and supervise theses and things like that. Currently, nowadays, I spend roughly 1/3 of my working hours on different kind of societal interactions. So I'm also quite a lot involved in trying to find solutions for different kind of conservation crisis, conservation dilemma, especially in the Finnish society. So I've been doing this kind of activity in relation to some forest conservation conflicts and for example, in relation to how we should actually apply the different legislation related to the biodiversity conservation. For example, the Finnish Forest Act. That is a really problematic law in many ways in relation to what kind of protection it gives to the forest biodiversity. And also some of my societal interaction is of course international. So I've been, for example, participating with a minor role in the actions of the International Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and this kind of activities, international conservation activities. So that was my introduction to myself basically, and now let's go to the topic. So in this talk, first of all, I'm giving you like a short introduction to global situation, what do we know at the moment, and then to some Nordic or basically Finnish situation. And then I will discuss some example cases on actually that what is happening and how we should understand the current phenomenon in the phenomenon of biodiversity loss, and then also some mitigation tools or methods. Esa Huhta had a presentation in the same webinar series a couple of weeks ago, and our titles were pretty similar, and Esa actually discussed many of the themes that I was planning to discuss in my own presentation. So I changed this a bit, and now basically to avoid overlaps with Esa's presentation. So in the end, because of this, there will be some mismatch with the title and content in this presentation, but I hope that you will find this interesting anyways. So I'm not like Esa presented, like he went through, for example, the recent red list evaluation of Finland and discussed the main threats to biodiversity and that kind of things. So I'm not gonna do that kind of a review of the threats to biodiversity in Finland, because he already did it, and it would be boring for the people that were present in both events. Okay, let's go to the international situation. What do we know about the global trends on biodiversity? And the best way to look at is to discuss shortly the Global Biodiversity Outlook 5 that was presented in last autumn, I think September or something like that. So it's really updated and new evaluation of of how biodiversity is doing on like globally. What do we know about it? And this is what the Global Biodiversity Outlook 5 ended up saying. Basically, the summary is that the thing is the situation is catastrophic, and we have to do actions on large scale, basically large scale actions, and also to use like wide variety of actions to even to stop the biodiversity loss, and especially if we want to restore some of the already lost biodiversity. So this is just like a schematic figure on the situation, but the main understanding and what do we know about the situation at this moment is that this kind of traditional conservation, that basically making set aside areas for biodiversity, it's not enough alone to stop biodiversity loss. But in addition to that, we have to restore some of the degraded ecosystems. We have to stop climate change, or at least slow down it, like really powerfully and heavily slow down climate change. We also have to reduce the consumption, the general level of consumption, especially in this kind of Western countries, where we just consume way too much. And we have to change the methods of production of different kind of goods. We have to change the overall methods towards more sustainable ways, for example, in agriculture and also in industry. So we have to use the whole kind of toolbox, and with by means of traditional conservation, we are not even able to stop the biodiversity loss. And especially if we even want to go back to the level, for example, where we were in like let's say year 2000, like 20 years ago, which is not far, but still after year 2000, we have lost so much of biodiversity that we have to do really heavy actions to get back even to that stage. This is the current understanding of the global state of biodiversity. So it's really worrying and alarming, and it's basically makes you feel pretty sad. So the Global Biodiversity Outlook 5, for example, of course, it wasn't the first time when the humankind gives some kind of makes some kind of analysis of the state of biodiversity and gives some kind of promises. And the record with the previous promises, it's really bad. The Aichi targets by Convention on Biological Diversity, the Aichi targets for 2020 have been the most powerful kind of promises given by international, basically the whole humankind. The promises targets to stop biodiversity loss. So in 2010, the Convention on Biological Diversity set 20 targets to stop biodiversity loss. And when we look at those targets now, we can say that none of them have been achieved. So the earlier record is really, really, really bad. And of course, one could say that it's just impossible to reach any kind of good targets with because of the, let's say, population growth and different kind of challenges that we are having. But if we look at the United Nations Millennium Development Goals that were given in the year 2000, and they were basically targeted for the year 2015. The figure on the right is a summary of these Millennium Development Goals. So they were related to different kind of human well-being, like actions to stop extreme poverty and child mortality and that kind of things globally. They sounded really difficult in the year 2000, but still we were able to reach many of the targets. Actually, before 2015, we reduced child mortality in the poor countries, and we also reduced extreme poverty by pretty big amount when we just wanted to, and that was like a success story of united actions of the humankind. So we have done that with different really difficult challenges, but for biodiversity we have not been able to reach any of the targets. So yeah, this is basically the global situation with the trends of biodiversity and with the current situation. When you look at Finland, and basically this story would be exactly similar in Sweden or Norway, and so the whole Fennoscandia situation is pretty similar, and it's as alerting as the global state. For example, according to the previous Finnish red list evaluation, every 9th species in Finland is threatened. So it's a relatively big proportion, and Esa Huhta gave a lot of details of this in his talk, so I recommend you to look at his presentation for more detailed evaluation of the Finnish situation. But when you look at either the global situation or the Finnish or Fennoscandian situation, the main threats of biodiversity are the same. And this is the list of the main threats to biodiversity. So the red ones are the phenomenon that are related to habitats. The habitats where the species actually live. So the habitat destruction, habitat fragmentation, and habitat degradation, they are different phenomena, but they often affect biodiversity simultaneously, and they are connected to each other. So habitat destruction often happens simultaneously with the habitat fragmentation. For example, if you have a large primeval forest patch and you build a road, a highway across the patch, you cause habitat destruction because you have to cut some of the forests under the road, but you also cause habitat fragmentation because then that one primeval forest patch is fragmented into 2 patches. Habitat degradation means different kind of decrease in the habitat quality, but the area of the habitat is not changed if you only have habitat degradation. But for example, this highway example would cause also habitat degradation because for example, the microclimate of the remaining patches is changed because the wind and sunlight can affect the forest from the road, and it may be that the highway also causes all kind of pollution effects or similar effects. The species assemblages may change because of the road and so on. But these 3 are connected to each other, and then the other threats to biodiversity are basically climate change, over-exploitation of the species, for example, fish and the species that are hunted, the game species, and then invasive species and diseases. These 7 threats are, in most cases, are the main threats to biodiversity. If you look at Finland, this is again from the previous Finnish red list evaluation. The general threats are the same, but they are classified in the Finnish red list evaluation in a bit different way. I'm sorry that the abbreviations are a bit difficult, but the M letter is some the actions related to forestry, so that is the most important threat to Finnish biodiversity is different kind of forestry actions. Then the N is for example, it's related to different kind of open habitats, usually traditional rural habitats that are, because of the intensification of the agriculture, these kind of habitats are, there's a lot of overgrowth and for example, over nutrification, because the nutrients are leaked from the agriculture and so on. So the second most important is related to too intensive agriculture. Climate change is the letter I, so it's still a quite small threat to Finnish biodiversity, and there are some more important, like building new. R is building, like basically the land use of the growing cities and so on. There's mining industry and different kind of threats, but perhaps the main result is that forestry in different ways is the most important threat to Finnish biodiversity. And why the forestry is a threat to Finnish biodiversity? It's related to the previous slide. Forestry causes habitat destruction, habitat fragmentation, and habitat degradation for the species that are living in the forests. And because forests are the most common habitat type in Finland, then it's pretty simple that is the most important threat to Finnish biodiversity. So it's kind of predictable and obvious in a way. Okay, so globally, habitat destruction causes habitat destruction, fragmentation, and degradation causes biodiversity loss, and that's the same in Finland, also in the forest context. But how Finland is doing in this kind of international context from this point of view, this is a heavily debated topic in Finland, and there's this the image is highly debated and has been highly debated in Finland lately. It says that more than half of the protected forest in Europe is in Finland. And this is of course not true. It's basically it's bullshit, but it's still pretty generally spread message in Finnish context.
Please, can you say how much the Finnish total is from Europe?
Yeah, I will say. So it's this statement is based on classification of European protected forests. So they have been basically by the Forest Europe, the protected forests have been classified into different kind of classes that kind of show that how strictly protected they are. And Finland just happened to classify the protected forests in a different way than, for example, the neighboring countries. For example, Sweden classified their protected forests in a bit different way than Finland. And because of this difference in kind of classifying the protected land in different countries in different ways, Finland kind of seems to be way better in kind of conserving forests than other countries. In reality, the level of protected forests is pretty similar in Finland and Sweden, and in reality, Finland has something like close to 15% of the strictly protected forests of Europe. So the true figure would be that 15% of the strictly protected forests in Europe is in Finland. But when you want to lobby that Finland is really doing well in this kind of sustainable use of forests, you can just pick one number from the statistics and claim this, which is of course not true. This is from an advertisement campaign of the Finnish forest industry. This figure, you can see this Metsien Suomi. So this is basically an advertisement campaign that was paid by the Finnish forest industry and also partly by the Finnish government. And this is pretty worrying and alarming that this kind of figure and statement is spread. I want to give you one international example of forest biodiversity loss, and then I will give you then I will try to connect the Finnish situation to that, to see that what are the similarities in the international situation of forest biodiversity loss and in the Finnish or Fennoscandian situation of forest biodiversity loss. So for this reason, I first want and have to give you basically an international example. And my international example is from the Southeast Asian rainforests. So this, you can see this is a satellite image from Indonesia. So the island on the right is Borneo, and an island on the left is Sumatran island. And then you see the on the high up, you can see the peninsula where Thailand and the mainland Malaysia is situated. And all the parts with colors in the figure are patches with forest loss between the year 2000 and 2019. So there's massive primeval forest loss in the area, and all the large black patches, for example, these here in Sumatra, all these are national parks. And also, for example, there you have a national park. So the only area where there's like larger, not protected primeval forest left is the inland Borneo. The situation is insanely bad, and it's highly it's proceeding fast, and the forest loss is intensive and extensive. When you zoom closer, you can see that it proceeds year by year. So the different colors are forest loss happening in different years, and the turquoise is the most recent. Red is basically turquoise and red are the forest losses happening in, let's say, the last 5 years or something, and yellowish orange are forest loss happening between 2000 and 2015 or something like that. When you zoom even further, you can see that this is what's happening. So on the left, you see primeval rainforest, and then in the center, there's a palm oil. That's a palm oil plantation. So every green dot is one palm, and then on the right you can see, I'm not sure what that is, it may be other agricultural area, or then it's an area that is just planted for the palm, but the palms have not grown yet. So this is what is reason what is happening on the ground. So this is something that an example of really worrying global forest habitat loss that is happening at the moment and causing extinctions, of course. Sumatran rhino, for example, is going to be extinct planet in a couple of decades. If the forest loss is not stopped really fast. So yeah, there we are losing unique species, and it's really sad and awful what is happening. Then let's come back to Finland, and so what is happening here and how this is related to the Finnish situation. The problem is that the same phenomenon happens, of course, here. It's mostly already happened, and that is why we kind of we Western people are sometimes we can be really blind to the habitat loss that happens in our own land, especially because it's already happened. And it's really easy to go and say for example, to Indonesian leaders that you have to stop the forest loss because our forests were lost already on the 18th century or something like that. So this is from the famous book by Petri Ketotoko and Timo Kuuluvainen called The Primeval Forest of Finland. This is the loss of natural forests in Finland. So you can see the numbers. Always the left number is the year and the right number is the people, the number of inhabitants in Finland, number of people in Finland at the moment when the map is drawn. So you can see that we lost large share of our primeval forests already in the 18th century, but still 50 we had quite large areas of primeval forest remaining in Finland, especially in the eastern part, and let's say that almost the whole upper Lapland was still a primeval forest in 1950. And the current situation is basically like this, so that we have tiny patches remaining, except a bit larger patches remaining in Lapland. And when you look at, this is the same kind of satellite map from northern Finland than what I showed from the Southeast Asia. So, and then there's some northern Sweden and western Russia also in the picture. You can see that the colors again in the map are forest loss between 2000 and 2019, but of course here most of this kind of activities now is it's not similar kind of forest loss than what's happening in Southeast Asia, but this is basically harvesting, it's forest management, and then the forest is basically, because it's planted, it's coming back again. So this is not like permanent forest loss in the same sense that what happens in Southeast Asia. But you can see that actually this area here in the northern part of the map is like upper Lapland, and you can see this kind of similar kind of border of forest activities, of forest loss than what you can see in, for example, in the inland Borneo. And currently at this moment there are some pretty heavy, pretty intense discussion on some logging plans of some primeval forest happening in, for example, in the Inarin yhteismetsä and some other large forest areas in Lapland. So we still have kind of a similar primeval forest loss extending to the areas, to the basically the more natural areas. We still have the same phenomenon going on in northern Fennoscandia than what is happening in Southeast Asia. So we still basically have this kind of a frontier zone of forest loss in Lapland, let's say Finnish, Swedish Lapland, than what is happening in Southeast Asia. But still, European countries often say, what, for example, you remember the forest fires in the Amazon, when even the French president was heavily saying that the Brazilians, you have to stop the logging and burning of primeval forests. And we have our own similar kind of frontier, the logging of primeval forests, still happening in Europe, in Northern Europe. So basically my claim is that these kind of demands for developing countries, they are colonialistic talk as long as we rich Western countries continue logging of our own remaining primeval forests. For example, the lower right photo in this slide, I forgot to add the name, it's I think it's a photo of the Greenpeace Finland, and it's not protected. It's unprotected primeval forest in Finland, and the photo is taken last summer. So this is what is still happening in northern Finland. And if we keep on logging this kind of forests, and at the same time we set claims for Brazilian or Indonesian government to stop logging primeval forests, we are not in any way better than the colonialists in let's say 18th, 19th century that were doing all kind of bad things in the developing countries, let's say in Africa or Southeast Asia or South America.
Panu, please, only 5 minutes.
Yeah. So the current claim is that the retention trees and other actions in managed forests are solving the problem. So okay, we still do some logging in the primeval forests, but we do different kind of actions in managed forests, and this will solve the biodiversity problems in Finland. The problem is that we have in the natural forests, we have different kind of structures that basically can't be promoted by this kind of retention trees and other habitat management actions in the managed forests. This tree here is an example of that. So this is a really ancient Kelo tree, like a really old dead standing pine. And there's a couple of images showing that how old the tree is. So the old painting is from the war between Denmark and Sweden, which happened in 1663. And that was the year when this pine started to grow. So 1663. And the photo is from the War of Lapland in 1945. That was the year when this tree died. So this tree has a history that is from that kind of, like, it's that long history. And I know it because I've studied that kind of trees together with my colleagues, for example, Tuomas Aakala and Sonja Saine. And these kind of trees are the resources that are needed by many threatened species in the boreal forest. And let's say that with the method of, let's say, retention forestry, so we leave a retention tree like an 80-year-old pine today. It will provide this kind of structures in, let's say, 200 or 300 years. So from this moment, if we do retention forestry today, we can help the species that are dependent in this kind of trees in something like 2250 or something like that. So it's useless and pointless to try to help that kind of species with retention forestry. These mycocalicioid fungi, for example, are species that are living on the surfaces of Kelo trees, and they are a good example of a species group that can never use the retention trees or that kind of structures, or never is a bad word, but let's say in 200 years they can't use those. So we need to protect all the primeval forests that are remaining to help this kind of species. Yeah, I see that I'm running out of time, but I will just briefly go through a couple of slides. The one problem is that especially with this kind of species like the mycocalicioid fungi that are living on really old surfaces, like really old Kelo trees, and they are really long living species with really slow kind of generation time and that kind of things. They have really long extinction depth. So extinction depth means that if we destroy habitats today, the species are not going extinct immediately, but there will be a time lag between the habitat loss and the extinctions. And the time lag, the relaxation time is when we have actually extinction depth, sukupuuttovelka. And we have basically no idea how big the extinction depth is in boreal forests at the moment. It's 100% sure that we have some extinction depth, but we don't know how many species we are going to lose based on the habitat loss that has already happened before this moment. And that is one of the reasons why we should be worried, and we actually should do. We should protect all the remaining primeval forests today, and not continue the logging. Okay, I will skip these other examples that I had, but I will just go through this. So it's often said that we can't afford protecting all the time more and more forests every day, because the humans need the land, and especially with the growing population, we have to use even more land than we use today, for example, for forestry or agriculture. So we can't afford retaining area for conservation with this kind of protected expected population growth. And therefore, I kind of want to go back to the Global Biodiversity Outlook 5 that I mentioned in the beginning. Yes, the population is growing, we need more land, so we have to change also our ways of consumption. For example, this is one example drawn by Seppo Leinonen, that we have so many domestic animals at this moment that they are actually using the land. So for example, if we all humankind would today stop eating meat totally, we could use the land that is nowadays actually used to feed the domestic mammals. We could use that area for the forestry purposes, and then protect the primeval forests. So we have this kind of solutions, but it means that we have to totally change our ways of consumption, our lifestyle. We don't have any other solution to this crisis. And everybody must join this kind of activities. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll stop here because I'm already over time. So thank you.
Okay, but then we go further, and Denis, are you ready to make some comments? Please, only 5 minutes.
Yes. Thank you, Panu, for your presentation. And yeah, I would like to say that Finland is the world leader in forest management, forest planning, and if we are talking about forestry, it is very efficient in Finland, and forests provide many benefits to people, to society, and it is not only wood, but it is also non-timber forest products and places for ecotourism. But on the other hand, yes, Finland has had to sacrifice a part of biodiversity in the process of intensive forest management development, unfortunately. And I remember that when I just started to collaborate with my Finnish colleagues, I was surprised when I saw how tiny old-growth forests in Finland, which NGOs were trying to save, compared to the situation in Russia, where I'm originally from. And habitats are very fragmented in Finland. But on the other hand, there are no illegal logging, there are no huge wild forest fires, in Finland, like in many other countries and regions of the world, which are a threat to people and biodiversity in many countries. And also, I agree with Panu that it is important to critically analyze protected areas, because it is important to analyze not only the areas of protected areas, but also what is inside, which high conservation values are inside of protected areas, and which protection modes, if they are strong enough to protect these values. Because I was involved in a Finnish-Russian project together with SUKE, Finnish Environmental Institute, where we are working with Barents Protected Area Network. And we analyzed not only protected areas, but also we were trying to analyze protection modes of protected areas in the Barents region, including northern part of Finland. And may I ask questions now, Vesa, or it is later? Okay, I have some questions. Maybe I can ask these questions now.
Okay, now, yes, you can ask.
Okay, great. My first question about continuous cover forestry. In Finland, the legislation was changed in 2014, and currently a forest owner can decide which type of forestry model he or she can implement in the forest. And my question is, what do you think, Panu, whether and how this development of continuous cover forestry can impact protection of forest biodiversity in Finland? Can we say about some impact in this context?
Yeah, thanks. It's a really difficult and tricky one, and it's also one that is really heavily debated in Finland, and it's not easy to answer quickly. But it's basically so that if you look at the current landscape in Finland, basically the clear-cut forestry is so heavily dominating that if we could add at least some continuous cover forestry to the landscape, it would be clearly beneficial for the biodiversity, because there's a clear demand of this kind of forest habitats with continuous coverage, like with the shady microclimate and this kind of conditions. So if we could add at least some of that to the landscape, it would help biodiversity. But then it's not easy to say that how biodiversity would actually react if the whole landscape would be treated by the continuous cover forestry. Then it could even actually be worse than not worse than the current perhaps, but also not better. So the optimal landscape for biodiversity it could be something that we would, first of all, we would increase the coverage of the protected forests, especially in southern Finland, by quite a lot. We would protect all the primeval forest patches that are left, and then the remaining area that could be, for example, 70% of forests. For example, half of that would be treated by continuous cover forestry, and half of that with the traditional like clear-cut forestry. That kind of landscape could be pretty good for biodiversity, but of course it's really far from the current conditions. but it's sure that some increase in continuous cover forestry would be really good for biodiversity. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And one more question from my side is, several years ago, I heard from one professor that forest research in nearest future, should be focused on, in Finland, should be focused on how to manage forest in a way that to have more rare and endangered species on the one hand, and to produce more wood simultaneously in the same area. So how to intensify forestry even more than it is now, but how to protect red data book species. What do you think about this approach? Is it possible, and can science help to implement this approach?
Yeah, it's sometimes it feels, when you look at the discussion on the forests, it feels like that it's a bit like Jesus, who made, like, you know, 2 fish and whatever, 5 bread, and that was enough for 400 people or something like that. So I don't believe that in the same forest patches you could intensify forestry even more and produce a lot of resources for red listed species. But I believe that we could intensify the forestry in some patches. For example, it could be a wise decision to show that, okay, we have this area that is not very important in biodiversity, but it's really beneficial. It's close to some industry, for example, and good for tree growth. That could, in some areas, we could intensify the forestry even more to produce a lot of timber with a smaller land, but at the same time we should clearly reduce the intensity of forestry in some areas that are especially important for biodiversity. So we could do the both things at the same time, but I don't believe that it will happen in the same hectares, in the same forest stands. It's difficult to believe.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. And then we should continue with audience and questions from there. And could you hear me now? Yes. In Finland and Sweden, the forest management practices are characterized as sustainable. How much of biodiversity we can sacrifice in order to be able to harvest as much forest biomass as possible for buildings, biofuels, and etc. And which parts of Finland and Sweden we have the lowest biodiversity index? Maybe the later is easier to answer. Okay, Panu.
Yeah. First of all, it's Finland and Sweden. Basically, the officials, for example, the government and that kind of, they say that it's sustainable. But for example, in Finland, we have more than 800 threatened forest species, as you saw from Esa Huhta's presentation, if you were present. So it's highly debatable if forest management is sustainable here, and I would say that it can't be if we have that much of threatened biodiversity. And of course, also from the social perspective, it's really problematic if it's sustainable. Firstly, I kind of don't agree that they are sustainable. And how much of biodiversity we can sacrifice? It's of course, in some areas we could sacrifice some biodiversity, but I think, and it's basically agreed with by United Nations, for example, Convention on Biological Diversity, European Union, and for example, Finnish government, they have all agreed that we can't sacrifice any biodiversity. All of those bodies have said that they want and they have committed to stop biodiversity loss. That means that they have committed to stop extinctions with like 100%. So we can't afford losing any biodiversity like globally. I mean, so if there's a threat that Finnish biodiversity, for example, causes global extinctions, then we have to reduce the intensity of that. And I think that we should reduce the current rate of harvesting a bit. We don't have to do really big reduction in the harvesting rate, but we should do some to promote sustainability. And which parts of Finland and Sweden have the lowest biodiversity index? Well, biodiversity index, at least in Finland, the forest biodiversity is clearly doing worse in the western part of the country than in the eastern part. And I think it's partly related to the map that I showed you, that the primeval forests were first destroyed in the western part of Finland, then in the eastern part. And that's mostly related, or at least it's heavily related to the tar industry in the 18th century and perhaps also in the 17th century. And then partly to the fact that Western Finland was inhabited earlier than in the eastern part. About Sweden, I'm not that sure, but my feeling is that the southernmost parts of Sweden are worse in biodiversity than the northernmost part.
Okay, which amount of the area of the forest landscape should be the highly effective forest? Is it 10 or 50 or 70%?
Well, I've written one paper on this with Janne Kotiaho a few years ago, where we kind of proposed this kind of idea that 1/3 of the landscape would be like pro-biodiversity landscape, and then 2/3 would be like more intensively used. I don't mean that in these 2/3, of course, in that part of landscape we would still have to have, for example, the key habitats would be protected and so on, but perhaps 2/3 of landscape could be like more intensive forestry, and 1/3 would be like the protected part of the landscape. But it's perhaps something like this, but I don't mean that on 2/3 we would destroy everything, but we could retain the current level of protection in 2/3 of landscape, and then 1/3 would be perhaps not totally protected, but with a lot more protection than currently. Something like this. These are really rough kind of ideas of how it could be.
Yeah, there are a lot of mentions about that. Can we save all these slides and then send to the audience, and that's allowed also? Okay. And how we can do it, maybe it's best you leave your email addresses in chat, please.
We will have the email addresses automatically.
Okay, but then we can send them all.
Yeah.
Good. We have some minutes, actually 2 minutes time left, and then maybe I ask also that what do you think about the when the World Meteorological Organization's Secretary General Petteri Taalas says that it's enough we can avoid climate change destructions only if we just leave out fossil fuels, and there is no need to do anything with forests. What do you think about this?
Well, Talas and his talk are a massive. It's a massive problem because he kind of throws different kind of claims. For example, he has said that for example, he has claimed that we can start using this kind of biofuels as one way away from the fossil fuels, and currently where the biofuels are coming from it's the primeval rainforests. So I don't know, his ideas are weird in many ways in how to stop climate change. And if we go with his proposals, it would mean massive forest losses in many areas of the planet. So I think that his claims are problematic in many ways, but one is that one like reality is that, for example, if we have a primeval forest in Lapland at this moment, for example, let's say Inarin yhteismetsä as an example, the trees that are logged from there may be 300 years old. So for 300 years, the tree has been collecting carbon from the atmosphere, and now it's logged and it's burned as energy and heat in the power plant. So in a couple of weeks after the logging, the 300 years of carbon is in the atmosphere, and the tree growth in Lapland is so slow that it takes perhaps not 300 years, but it can take 100 years for the carbon to be taken back from the atmosphere. So it may be that it's possible to stop climate change only with actions in relation to fossil fuels, but it will be a lot easier if we don't burn 300-year-old trees when we try to stop biodiversity loss, because that will make it way more difficult to stop biodiversity loss.
That's right.
So it would just be easy to not burn them.
Now the clock is over 2, and we have to have 2 minutes pause, and I stop also my video and set the mute on, and then we continue after 2 minutes, 5 over 2.